Aisha and the whispers in the wind. The sun beat down on the village of Al-Naka, baking the mud brick houses and turning the sand into a shimmering haze. Aisha squinted, the fine dust already clinging to her eyelashes as she and her mother, Fatima, gathered what meager firewood they could find. Each day, the search grew longer, the land drier. The whispers of drought turned into a deafening roar. "Stay close, Aisha," Fatima cautioned, her voice raspy from the dust. "The desert is unforgiving." Aisha nodded, but her gaze drifted toward the cluster of scraggly acacia trees in the distance. There, she might find thicker branches, enough to keep their small cooking fire burning through the night. "I'll just go a little further, Mama. I saw something promising." Fatima sighed, the lines etched deep into her face seeming to deepen. "Be quick, child, and stay within sight." Aisha darted away, the thrill of possibility outweighing her obedience. The wind, a constant companion in Al-Naka, whipped around her, carrying with it the scent of sand and something else, something metallic. She ignored it, focusing on the brittle branches underfoot. She reached the acacia trees, their leaves withered and brown. Disappointment pricked at her. There was nothing here but thorny bushes and the ever-present sand. As she turned to go back to her mother, a faint sound, almost imperceptible against the wind's howl, reached her ears. A cry? Aisha froze, her heart pounding. She strained, listening intently. There was again a weak, strangled sound. It seemed to be coming from beyond the trees, towards the dunes that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Against her better judgment, and the warning in her mother's voice, Aisha crept forward. The sand grew softer, making each step more difficult. The metallic scent intensified, now mixed with a sharp, coppery tang. Rounding a dune, she stopped dead. Tied to the gnarled trunk of a lone, stunted tree was a man. His clothes, though clearly expensive and foreign, were torn and caked with dirt. His face was bruised and swollen, his lips cracked and bleeding. The metallic smell was strongest here. She saw dried blood staining the sand beneath him. He was barely conscious, his head lolling against his chest. Aisha cautiously approached. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He focused on her with difficulty, his gaze unfocused and filled with pain. "Help," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "Please." Aisha's initial fear gave way to a surge of compassion. He was clearly in terrible pain and alone. She had to help him. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice gaining strength. He blinked slowly, struggling to speak. "Bandits took everything." He coughed, a ragged, painful sound. "Water." Aisha remembered the small clay flask tucked into her shawl, meant for her and her mother. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She quickly untied it and brought it to his lips. He drank greedily, the water dribbling down his chin. When he had finished, he looked at her with something akin to gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, child." Aisha studied the ropes binding him to the tree. They were thick and knotted tight. She had no knife, and her small hands wouldn't be able to untie them. She needed Fatima. "I'll be back," she said, her voice firm. "I'll get help." She turned and ran. The image of the injured man burned into her mind. The wind seemed to whip at her back, urging her onward. She had to reach Fatima, had to convince her to help this stranger. The desert was unforgiving, but perhaps, with a little kindness, they could soften its heart. The rancher's debt. Aisha wrestled with the final vine, securing the man against the ancient acacia's thorny embrace. Each tug brought a pinprick of blood to her fingertips, sting she dismissed. A guttural groan escaped him, a tremor that rippled through the sun-baked earth. Beside her, Fatima meticulously unfettered his ankles. The knot, a testament to cruel skill, resisted her efforts, each movement measured, mindful of his suffering. "Hush now, friend," Fatima soothed, her voice a gentle counterpoint to the desert's rasp. Aisha, her brow creased in concern, observed until Fatima finally freed his bare feet. He sagged, his full weight threatening to topple them. Careful, Aisha warned, instinctively bracing. Together, they eased him onto the parched ground. He lay prone, his breathing shallow and uneven, dust coating the remnants of a once fine shirt, a clear indication of his foreign origins. Fatima pressed an ear to his chest. He lives, praise God, but he is gravely wounded. With effort, they rolled him onto his back. Dirt and pain masked his features, a livid bruise blooming at his temple. Aisha retrieved water from their precious clay jar, coaxing droplets onto his parched lips. He swallowed weakly. "We must get him to the shelter," Fatima declared, her gaze sweeping the stark horizon. The sun, a relentless hammer, pounded the land. "Aisha, can you assist?" The task was arduous. He was a man of considerable size, and they mere girls. Yet, they hauled and supported, his weight a burden between them, inching towards their humble dwelling, a fragile sanctuary of mud and thatch against the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Aisha's muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but determination spurred her onward. The interior of their home offered scant relief from the sun's searing glare. Fatima spread a threadbare blanket on the packed earth floor. Together, they carefully shifted the injured man onto it. Aisha cleansed his wounds with cool water and a scrap of cloth. Fatima probed the gash on his head. "A bad one," she murmured, worry tightening her expression. "But by God's will, it has not fractured his skull." He stirred, his eyelids fluttering open like a fledgling bird's. A soft moan escaped him. "Water," he rasped, his voice a dry husk. Aisha again held the water to his lips. He drank deeply, his throat working. Finally, drawing back, his eyes, still clouded with agony, focused on them. Where am I?" he croaked. "You are safe here," Fatima replied gently. "We found you, bound to a tree." He blinked, his gaze sweeping across the meager space, absorbing the bare walls, the rudimentary furnishings. Recognition dawned, swiftly followed by a flicker of something akin to dread. "My ranch," he began, then flinched, clutching at his throbbing head. "They're trying to take my ranch." "Who is?" Aisha challenged, her voice surprisingly steady. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Not merely a child, but a girl possessing a potent spirit, her eyes alight with sharp intelligence. He perceived the same fortitude etched into Fatima's weathered face, a silent testament to a life lived in coexistence with the land's brutal demands. "My name is Davenport," he stated, his voice gaining strength. "John Davenport. And there are men who covet what I own. They left me to perish." He paused, inhaling deeply. "I am indebted to you both beyond measure. I will repay you, I swear it. My ranch, it is called El Mirador. If I can return there." His voice trailed off, his gaze hardening with resolve. Fatima placed a calloused hand on his arm. "Rest now, Mr. Davenport. We will discuss this later. For now, healing is your priority." He regarded her hand, rough and strong, resting upon his own, pale and unsteady. Overwhelming exhaustion claimed him. He closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, the words laced with profound gratitude. Aisha watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't grasp the entirety of his words, but she understood one thing. They had stumbled into a web of danger, a situation that held the power to irrevocably alter their lives. And despite the apprehension gnawing at her insides, a shiver of excitement traced its way down her spine. Return to Davenport Ranch. Dust devils danced in the wake of the buckboard as it lurched through the Davenport Ranch gates, their once proud iron now resembling prison bars. Davenport, back rigid with suppressed anxiety, surveyed the sprawling acreage, his gaze stripped of its former arrogance. A ragged cheer greeted the buckboard's arrival at the main house. Workers, their faces creased with concern, surged forward. He spotted young Miguel, his customary grin subdued, and the indomitable Martha, her aged hands clasped tight. "Mr. Davenport, we feared the worst," Martha exclaimed, her voice thick with relief. "Good to be home, Martha," Davenport replied, his voice gravelly from disuse and the arid climate. Grounding himself on solid earth, a welcome respite from the buckboard's jostling, he clapped Miguel's shoulder. "How fares the ranch, Miguel?" Miguel's smile wavered. "We're holding on, sir. But Jedediah's men, they're still out there. Shadows in the hills." Davenport's face, a map of sun and wind, tightened. He'd entertained the faint hope his return might deter them. A foolish notion. Jedediah was a tenacious blight, poisoning the land. "How many are we talking?" "Difficult to say, sir. A dozen, maybe more. No overt moves, not yet. But nerves are frayed." He nodded, understanding etched on his face. He couldn't begrudge their fear. A cold dread coiled in his own gut. He had to shield these people, his responsibility. Blinded by ambition and the lure of wealth, he had nearly forsaken them. He turned toward the house, a sandstone edifice with sweeping verandas, feeling less like a returning sovereign and more like a commander inspecting a vulnerable stronghold. The air, usually alive with the comforting orchestra of ranch life, the deep rumble of cattle, the sharp ring of horseshoes, children's peals of laughter, now thrummed with palpable unease. Aisha and Fatima filled his thoughts. He hadn't properly thanked them, nor assured their safety. He'd offered a few coins and a promise, a currency of little value in this lawless territory. He could only pray they had reached their village unscathed. Jedediah's men would prey on the defenseless without hesitation. The image of those courageous women, especially Fatima, her steady gaze and quiet fortitude, falling prey to Jedediah. He shuddered involuntarily. Stepping into the house's cool depths, the familiar aroma of leather and beeswax offered scant comfort. Aisha and Fatima's safety was paramount, and he needed to eradicate Jedediah's presence, root and stem. This land, his legacy, deserved tranquility. His people deserved freedom from fear. He wouldn't betray their trust again. He wouldn't abandon the women who had saved him. Summoning his foreman, who arrived hat in hand, his brow furrowed with worry, Davenport cut to the chase. "I need riders the fastest we have. We're riding west to that village near the creek." Threats in the desert. Dust devils pirouette across the parched earth as Jedediah's men materialized on the horizon. 3 figures, etched with hardship and menace, their mounts stirring up vermilion dust that settled like a death shroud on the struggling crops. A tremor, icy despite the furnace blast heat, seized Aisha. Beside her, Fatima subtly adjusted, a hand instinctively seeking the familiar comfort of the knife beneath her jalaba. They halted before Aisha's meager home, looming shadows engulfing the entrance. Jedediah's lieutenant, Silas, a man whose eyes were glacial shards, dismounted. His companions remained astride, taciturn sentinels flanking him. The air thrummed with implied violence. "Aisha," Silas rasped, his voice sandpaper on raw skin. "We're looking for the rancher." "Davenport." Aisha met his flinty gaze, resolution hardening her own. The memory of Davenport, broken and begging for succor, steeled her defiance. "I haven't seen him," she replied, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. A mirthless curve twisted Silas's lips. "Spare me the coyness, girl. We know he sought refuge here. We know you aided him." He indicated the makeshift bandages, remnants buried carelessly in the sand behind her dwelling. Fatima moved forward, a bulwark between Aisha and the lieutenant. "We offer succor to those in need," she declared, her tone resonating with a quiet strength that surprised even Aisha. "It is our custom." A dry, grating chuckle escaped Silas. "Your customs are about to bring you grief. Davenport is a wanted man. He robbed Jedediah blind. He was wounded," Aisha retorted. "We offered water and shelter. Nothing more." A half-truth, but loyalty forbade her from betraying Davenport. Silas's notoriously short fuse seemed to sputter. He encroached, his nearness suffocating. "Where is he?" he pressed, his voice a low growl. "Tell me, and this ends now. Refuse, and things will become disagreeable." The threat lingered, heavy as the unrelenting sun. A shift from one of the mounted figures, the steel glimmer of a rifle barrel catching the light. Aisha felt Fatima's hand tighten on her arm, silent reassurance flowing between them. Looking at her mother, she witnessed not fear, but unwavering fortitude. "We do not know his current whereabouts," Fatima reiterated, her voice calm and unyielding. "He departed days past." Silas spat, a vile glob landing scant inches from Aisha's bare foot. "Liar." He seized Aisha's arm, his grip of ice. "You imagine you can shield him? You think Jedediah will allow this defiance?" Aisha flinched but suppressed any sign of pain. She locked eyes with Silas, defiance blazing within. "We have committed no offense. We extended hospitality, a concept clearly foreign to you." Silas's face darkened with rage. He raised a hand, and for a petrifying instant, Aisha anticipated a blow. Instead, a passing cloud veiled the sun, casting a fleeting shadow. His hand slowly descended, his eyes gleaming with cold calculation. "You err grievously," he stated, his voice now dangerously smooth. "A monumental error. Jedediah does not suffer disrespect lightly. You believe this pathetic village can protect you? You believe the desert will conceal you? He will find you. And when he does..." He trailed off, leaving the unspoken menace to permeate the air. Releasing Aisha's arm, leaving a crimson brand on her skin, he swung back onto his horse, his gaze lingering, a silent promise of retribution. "We will return," he vowed. "And next time, our manners will be considerably less refined." The trio wheeled their horses and vanished, leaving Aisha and Fatima in the swirling dust, the only sound the whisper of the wind. The looming danger pervaded everything, thicker than the desert air. The sun, once welcoming, now felt like a malevolent eye, a constant reminder of the peril that had enveloped them. Aisha met Fatima's gaze, her heart burdened by fear and a burgeoning sense of accountability. Davenport had unleashed this storm, and now they had to weather it. A new home. The dust swirled around the tires of the approaching wagon, a familiar sound that sent a fresh wave of anxiety through Aisha. She gripped Fatima's hand tighter. It was him, Mr. Davenport. He'd returned. He climbed down, his face etched with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. Gone was the arrogance, the easy dismissal. He looked humbled. "Aisha, Fatima," he said, his voice rough, "I owe you both my life. And more than that, I understand now." Aisha remained silent, suspicious. Understand what? The danger they faced? The desperation that clung to their village like the desert dust? "Those men, they won't stop," he continued, his gaze sweeping the desolate landscape. "Not until they find what they're looking for. And if they think you know something..." Fatima stepped forward, her chin raised. "We know nothing. We only helped a man in need." Davenport nodded. "I believe you, but that won't matter to them. Which is why," he paused, drawing a deep breath, "I want you both to come live at my ranch, as my guests, for your own safety." Aisha's breath caught in her throat. His ranch? A place whispered about in hushed tones, a world away from their sun-baked existence. A beautiful lie. "Why?" Aisha asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this?" "Because," Davenport replied, meeting her gaze directly, "you saved my life. And because I can offer you protection. A better life. At least until this whole mess is sorted out." Fatima squeezed Aisha's hand, a silent communication passing between them. A better life. The words tasted like a forbidden fruit. They had dared to dream of little more than survival. After a hushed discussion, they agreed. The alternative was a slow fade into the landscape, hunted and afraid. This at least offered a chance. The journey to the ranch was a blur. Aisha stared out at the passing scenery, the familiar scrubland slowly giving way to green pastures and meticulously tended fields. She had never seen anything like it. Fatima remained stoic beside her, her eyes scanning the horizon. As they crested a small hill, the ranch came into view. Aisha gasped. It wasn't just a ranch. It was a sprawling estate, a cluster of white buildings nestled amongst towering trees, an oasis in the harsh desert. Horses grazed in lush meadows, their coats gleaming in the sun. A shimmering lake reflected the clear blue sky. It was a world of unimaginable wealth and comfort. They were shown to a small but comfortable cottage, separate from the main house, a small luxury to allow the women to retain their independence. It had 2 beds covered with thick, colorful quilts, a small table and chairs, and even a fireplace. A far cry from their meager hut in the village. "I'll have one of the hands bring over some supplies," Davenport said, his voice still tinged with a newfound humility. "Make yourselves at home." As soon as he left, Aisha rushed to the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of the ranch. It was beautiful, breathtaking even, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. This was a gilded cage, a world she didn't understand, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. They were now inside the web. Secrets of the ranch. The scent of hay and horse sweat hung heavy in the air as Aisha cautiously entered the stables. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She ran a hand along the smooth flank of a chestnut mare, the horse twitching its skin but remaining calm. Most of the horses were well-groomed, their coats gleaming, but one stall at the far end held a different story. A wild-eyed Mustang, its coat the color of sun-baked earth, paced restlessly. It snorted, tossing its head, and its muscles bunched and quivered. Mr. Davenport had mentioned it was new, unbroken. Ignoring the tremor of fear that ran through her, Aisha approached the stall. "Hello," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The Mustang stopped pacing, pinning her with its intense gaze. She held out a hand, palm up, allowing the horse to smell her. It hesitated, then extended its velvety nose, sniffing tentatively. The touch sent a strange jolt through Aisha, a feeling of connection she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear, but something akin to recognition. For minutes, they stood there, the only sound the rhythmic breathing of the horse. A quiet understanding formed between them, a silent promise of trust. Meanwhile, Fatima had already claimed a patch of dry earth near the main house. She surveyed the landscape with a practiced eye, noting the subtle variations in the soil, the way the wind moved, the intensity of the sun at different times of the day. This wasn't the lush landscape of her memories, but the desert held its own secrets, its own resilience. She scavenged discarded tools from the barn and began to till the soil, her movements efficient and strong. Mr. Davenport watched from the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. He hadn't seen anyone work with such purpose in a long time, least of all someone who had every reason to be bitter and resentful. Later that day, Aisha returned to the stables, a handful of carrots clutched in her hand. The Mustang nickered softly as she approached, its ears pricked forward. She offered the carrot, and the horse gently took it from her palm, its lips tickling her skin. She spent hours talking to the horse, telling it about her anxieties, her fears, her hopes for the future. The Mustang, in turn, seemed to listen, its dark eyes fixed on her face. She named it Hope, a silent wish whispered into the desert air. Fatima, covered in dust and sweat, had already started planting. She'd found a small cache of seeds in the barn, labeled simply Desert Mix. She supplemented these with cuttings taken from hardy shrubs growing wild on the ranch, knowing which ones could withstand the harsh conditions. Mr. Davenport approached her, his face etched with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice subdued. Fatima didn't look up. "Making a garden," she replied, her voice rough but steady. "This land needs life. It needs more than just cattle and horses." Mr. Davenport nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He saw then that Fatima wasn't just planting seeds. She was planting hope, just like her daughter with the horse. He'd offered them refuge, but they were offering him something far greater in return, a chance to redeem himself, to build something beautiful out of the ashes of his past. He watched them work, a quiet sense of awe settling over him. These weren't just survivors. They were creators, capable of transforming even the harshest landscape into a place of beauty and life. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that the secrets of the ranch weren't buried in the land, but in the hearts of these two women. The final showdown. The dust cloud on the horizon wasn't a dust devil this time. It pulsed with a menacing rhythm, the thunder of hooves growing with terrifying speed. Aisha squinted, her hand shielding her eyes. Jedediah. He was back, and this time he brought an army. Fatima, she yelled, her voice barely audible over the wind. They're here. Fatima, kneeling amidst the emerald shoots of her burgeoning garden, looked up, her face hardening. The serenity of the past few weeks evaporated, replaced by a grim determination. I'm ready, she replied, her voice low but firm. Mr. Davenport, who had been silently watching Aisha work with hope, the Mustang she'd been patiently gentling, stumbled forward, his face pale. He looked from the approaching horde to the two women, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something akin to awe. He still felt tied to the tree, metaphorically a prisoner of his past, but he wanted to fight for this new beginning. Jedediah and his men, a ragged bunch hardened by greed and desperation, crashed through the ranch gates, scattering chickens and sending dust devils spiraling. Jedediah, riding a massive black stallion, roared with laughter, the sound echoing across the valley. This is it, ladies. Time to hand over what's rightfully mine. Aisha didn't flinch. She moved with a swiftness that surprised even herself, vaulting onto Hope's back. The Mustang, sensing the urgency, pranced nervously but remained steady. He's wrong. Hope, Aisha murmured, stroking the Mustang's neck. This land belongs to those who cherish it. With a sharp whistle, she released the rest of the horses from the corral. They thundered past Jedediah and his men, a chaotic wave of muscle and mane, momentarily disrupting their advance. Fatima, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of activity. She had anticipated this day, preparing the land itself as a defense. She triggered the hidden sprinklers, turning the dusty ground into a muddy quagmire, slowing the horses' progress. She released hundreds of marbles onto the packed earth paths, turning them into treacherous skating rinks. The air filled with the sounds of curses and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. Jedediah, enraged by the unexpected resistance, spurred his stallion forward, ignoring the chaos around him. He spotted Aisha, a lone figure silhouetted against the rising sun, and charged. You can't win, girl. This land will be mine, one way or another. Aisha met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet defiance. She urged Hope into a gallop, leading Jedediah away from the ranch house, towards the whispering willows that lined the creek. She knew the terrain intimately, every dip and hollow, every root and rock. Fatima, watching from the porch, felt a surge of pride. Aisha, with her connection to the land and the wild creatures that roamed it, was a force to be reckoned with. She turned her attention back to the remaining attackers, guiding them towards a section of the garden she had subtly booby-trapped. A series of concealed holes, covered with leaves and branches, waited to ensnare the unwary. Mr. Davenport, shaking off his paralysis, grabbed a shovel leaning against the barn. It wasn't much, but it was something. He saw one of Jedediah's men attempting to flank Fatima, and he charged, swinging the shovel with surprising force. The man yelped, clutching his leg, as he fell into one of Fatima's cleverly disguised pits. The final showdown had begun, a desperate battle for the soul of the ranch, fought with courage, cunning, and a deep love for the land. An empire shared. Aisha gripped the reins of hope, the morning chill biting at her exposed skin. The air smelled of sage and impending violence. She could see them in the distance, a ragged line of men led by Jedediah, their horses kicking up dust devils across the parched earth. Fatima was already positioned, a silent sentinel amongst the rocks overlooking the main approach. Steady, girl, Aisha murmured to Hope, feeling the mare's muscles tense beneath her. This wasn't just about saving Mr. Davenport's ranch anymore. It was about proving that they wouldn't be pushed around. A gunshot cracked the air, a signal for Fatima. Jedediah and his men surged forward, expecting an easy victory. But Fatima knew the land intimately. She'd loosened rocks on the hillside, creating a miniature avalanche that sent men and horses scrambling for cover. Mr. Davenport stumbled out of the main house, his face pale but determined. He clutched a rifle, its barrel glinting in the harsh sunlight. I can't just stand by," he stammered, his voice barely audible above the din. Aisha spurred Hope forward, drawing Jedediah's attention. He bellowed an order, and 2 men broke away from the main group, charging towards her. She ducked, low in the saddle, feeling the wind whip past her face as she expertly dodged their clumsy advance. Hope, sensing her rider's intent, lashed out with her hind legs, sending one of the men sprawling. Mr. Davenport, emboldened by Aisha's bravery, fired a shot, hitting one of the remaining horses. The animal whinnied in pain, throwing its rider. Jedediah roared with frustration, his face contorted in a mask of fury. Fatima continued to harass them from above, using the terrain to her advantage. She picked off targets with deadly accuracy, her shots echoing through the valley. Jedediah's men, demoralized and disoriented, began to falter. Aisha saw her chance. She circled around, positioning herself between Jedediah and his retreating men. "It's over, Jedediah," she shouted, her voice clear and strong. "Go home." He glared at her, his eyes filled with venom. "This ain't over," he spat, raising his rifle. But before he could fire, Mr. Davenport tackled him from behind, sending them both crashing to the ground. The fight drained out of Jedediah's men. They saw their leader subdued, their horses scattered, and their plans in ruins. One by one, they turned and fled, disappearing into the vast expanse of the desert. Mr. Davenport, bruised and breathless, stood over Jedediah, who was now being restrained by Aisha. "I should have done this a long time ago," he said, his voice filled with regret. Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Mr. Davenport gathered Aisha and Fatima on the porch. The local sheriff had arrived and taken Jedediah into custody. The relief was palpable. I owe you both everything," Mr. Davenport began, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so afraid, so caught up in my own little world, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." He paused, taking a deep breath. "This ranch, this empire, it shouldn't belong to just me." He looked at Aisha, then at Fatima, his eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "I want you both to be my partners. We'll run this ranch together. An empire shared." Aisha and Fatima exchanged a surprised look. They hadn't expected this. "Are you sure, Mr. Davenport?" Aisha asked, her voice hesitant. He nodded firmly. "More sure than I've ever been about anything in my life. You saved me, you saved this ranch, and you showed me what it means to be brave. This is the least I can do." He extended a hand to each of them. "Partners." Aisha smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. Fatima, usually reserved, allowed a small smile to grace her lips as well. They both took his hands, sealing the agreement. The air, still carrying the scent of sage, now held the promise of a future built on shared dreams and unwavering loyalty. A prosperous future. Mr. Davenport's study smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco, a scent Aisha was quickly growing accustomed to. He sat behind a mahogany desk cluttered with ledgers and maps, his spectacles perched precariously on his nose. "All right, Aisha," he boomed, his voice still carrying a trace of the weakness from his ordeal. "Let's talk cattle futures. Understand, it's not just about raising them. It's about anticipating the market." He unfurled a massive chart covered in lines and numbers that looked like a foreign language to her. He spent the better part of the morning explaining supply and demand, seasonal fluctuations, and the delicate dance of hedging against risk. Aisha, initially overwhelmed, found herself captivated. There was a certain logic to it all, a rhythm that resonated with the natural cycles she understood so well. She peppered him with questions, her sharp mind quickly grasping the fundamentals. Mr. Davenport beamed, clearly enjoying her enthusiasm. "You've got a head for this, girl. A real head for it." While Aisha immersed herself in the business side of the ranch, Fatima turned her attention to the people. The ranch hands lived in cramped, dilapidated quarters, their families struggling with limited access to health care and education. Fatima, remembering her own hardships, felt a deep responsibility to improve their lives. She started small, organizing a community garden, providing fresh produce and a sense of shared purpose. Then, she leveraged some of their newfound wealth to establish a small clinic, hiring a traveling doctor to visit once a week. She negotiated with the local school to provide transportation for the ranch children, ensuring they had access to quality education. The changes were incremental, but they were tangible. The atmosphere on the ranch shifted, replaced by a sense of hope and belonging. Fatima found herself surrounded by grateful smiles and the sounds of children laughing, a symphony sweeter than any she had ever known. One evening, after a long day of negotiations with a livestock broker, Aisha found Fatima tending to the community garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Aisha watched as Fatima gently watered the seedlings, her face illuminated by the soft glow. "Mr. Davenport says we might be able to acquire the neighboring ranch," Aisha said, her voice filled with excitement. "It would double our grazing land." Fatima looked up, her eyes sparkling. "That's wonderful, Aisha. But let's not forget what's truly important." She gestured towards the children playing in the distance. Their laughter carried on the evening breeze. This is what matters." Aisha smiled, realizing Fatima was right. It wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about using it to make a difference. They walked together to the crest of a small hill, where they could see the vast expanse of the ranch stretching out before them. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The ranch hands and their families gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter. "Look at all this," Aisha said, her voice filled with awe. "We did this, Fatima. We built this." Fatima nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "We saved Mr. Davenport, and he saved us in return." But they both knew it was more than just luck or gratitude. It was their courage, their resilience, and their unwavering commitment to each other that had brought them to this moment. They had faced adversity and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As they stood there, hand in hand, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, they knew that their prosperous future was not just about wealth and power. It was about creating a just and equitable community where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, and they were ready to fight for it every step of the way. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming sage, a promise of new beginnings.